The largest failure of side proposition is that it cared so much about the parent and forgot about the children we care for. That's why side opposition stands on the basic principle that being in prison is not child's play. We're going to make this case through 3 lines of constructive argument. I'm going to make the first 2 constructive arguments under the theme of hurting children, under which I'm going to talk about how children are hurt by an unhealthy prison environment firstly, and second, how it exposes them to bad parents. My second speaker is then going to show how parents, single parents in prison, are hurt and it impedes their reformation to adopt side propositions policy. Now, where do we stand in terms of a model? We think that single parents shouldn't raise their children behind bars, but that doesn't mean that children aren't cared for. We can send them to relatives, if possible. And if relatives are unable or unwilling to care for the children, social workers or at most foster homes can be created for such children. It's already being done in most states across the world. For orphans, no thank you, or parents who are deemed unfit to care for their children due to their abusive nature with regard to alcoholics or drug addicts is something side proposition, or in fact conceded when they talked about how pedophiles can be kept away from their children. So they in fact concede as well that the state can sometimes restrict the rights of parents for the interest of children. When single parents emerge from prison, subject to the reviews of parole boards, as with all other prisoners, we think the parole committee can review whether or not they have successfully reformed, and contingent upon this, single parents may be able to get back custody of their children. Parole boards can also arrange visitations in jail between parents, single parents and their children to recognize good behavior on the part of imprisoned single parents. Before I move to my constructive analysis, I just want to deal with their case by asking 2 questions in rebuttal. First of all, is their policy legally just? Secondly, is it effective? Now let's talk first about the question of legal justification. Here, we agree with them that the children's rights are paramount, but we think that to protect the child does not mean allowing him to live behind bars for all of his formative years. Even if he spends his education outside, he spends most of the time at home, which is the prison. And we're going to think about the kind of role modeling that's created on the part of the parent. No thank you. On the part of the prison environment, where what he sees are prison fights, his parents being taken away from him most of the time under constant supervision of guards and being unable most of the time to have much freedom of movement or action. They say sometimes we can take away children if parents have, I quote, proven to have failed. That really concedes that states don't have, that parents don't have an absolute right to take care of their children on the part of the state. No thank you. And that's why we think even if they talk about criminality being mutually exclusive from parental rights and this idea of interactive rights, it's still the child's interest that's paramount. They haven't shown why taking the child into prison and fusing him into this entire environment is necessary. Good. Let's now talk about the second issue, about effectiveness for children. Here, they basically made their case on the idea that more crime is going to be created when children stay outside because they join gangs like La Familia. Well, let's remember one thing. Gangs may exist outside, but huge gangs exist in prisons as well. And children are going to be joining these prisons because their parents' instincts as former criminals are going to be modeled in the form of their children. And their children are also going to join the gangs. We don't think it's going to be any different. So, identity, yes, but a terrible identity at that. Yes.
You mischaracterize the nature of the environment where these children live in. We told you in the United States they're kept in secure and monitored environments, not simply behind usual prison bars. Deal with this, sir.
Secure and monitored environments, where they are kept isolated from the rest of society. What's the effect in terms of their identity, in terms of insecurities, and in terms of their status as children of single parents? That's precisely creating the kinds of harms that your first speaker talked about. I'm now going to move on to my substantive argument about how we hurt children through an unhealthy prison environment, in which I'm going to further clash with their arguments. Our thesis is that the state must stop parents from raising children behind bars to protect children from the horrors of incarceration. Now, we recognize all people, adults and children, have human dignity. Dignity is enshrined in human rights, the state's created to safeguard those human rights. Thus, the state has a duty to protect all citizens in society. In most cases, states do recognize the ability of parents to decide on behalf of their children. Why? Because they usually make good decisions using specialized knowledge. But we don't think parental autonomy over children is absolute. That's why in some cases, when there's clear and obvious harm to children, states already limit the decisions that parents can make. In the status quo, even if parents want to bring their children to watch pornographic films, they're not allowed to, because the state thinks it's bad exposure for immature, vulnerable children. That's the same reason why parents are prohibited from bringing children to bars or nightclubs to protect the children from the sleazy environment there. We think it's exactly the same when we're talking about prisons, which are filled with violent criminals, daily scenes of battles and violence, and a social hierarchy that isn't based on hard work or good values, but physical prowess and your ability to intimidate others. That's why in the United States, the very example they want to talk about, 87% of prisoners in federal prisons report they have been physically brutalized, so we don't see how it's a really secure and monitored environment, in their own words. That's why the Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky once said, prisons are the universities of crime. This is terrible for children in their formative years, when they need to learn that hard work and good character are what's valued, rather than your ability to fight or your ability to sell as many cigarettes in a prison as possible. It's especially crucial for children of single parents, who have proven to be the most high-risk group of minors where crime is concerned across Europe and the United States, who don't think we should expose such vulnerable children to crimes in their early years. Their self-worth is also hugely damaged because they see their parents labeled as criminals, following the dictates of guards who watch their every move, and so there's huge amounts of suffering, which we think is unnecessary, and that's why we wouldn't let single parents raise their children behind bars. Yes?
Sir, you haven't dealt with the analysis we gave you as to how by ripping children away from their single parents, you actually increase the bitterness and the incentives for them to seek out these universities of crime.
Bitterness comes when you see your parent being humiliated in prison. We don't see how that is solved when you decide to place them directly with parents who are being humiliated. We think it's far better for them to be with foster parents who are responsible legal guardians who haven't broken the law and who can provide them good role models rather than their parents in prison. So deal with that, sir. Let's move to my second point about hurting children by exposing them to bad parents. Our thesis is that parents who have committed serious crimes go to jail and aren't good role models for their children. So why are people sent to jail? Not for stealing a pen in a shop, a minor misdemeanor, but for major felonies like rape, kidnapping, and arson, as they can see them. So their freedom of movement and action is severely curtailed, prisoners are always under watchful eyes, and if they have to be watched like that, the signal is they're not fit to take responsibility for themselves, let alone others and their children. That's why we don't think they're fit to raise children in prison. Because children are supposed to learn values from their parents, like respect for law, respect for other people, people who've decided to sell others drugs, people who've decided to kidnap children or businessmen for money. Those are the kinds of parents whom children are going to be placed with in prisons. And these are precisely the heinous crimes single parents who go to jail have committed. And since in the status quo, we already take away children from negligent parents into foster care for responsible parents who abide by the law, we think the same principle applies here, and that's why, to stop children from being exposed to bad parenting, we will not let single parents raise children behind bars. So my speech has essentially focused on how we protect children today from bad parenting, how we protect them from prison environments which turn them evil, and that's why we truly stand for the children we care for.